Greetings! My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
So there is a lot of news in the D&D community lately because Wizards of the Coast has just announced their new round of playtesting for the future of Dungeons & Dragons in D&D 1. They've just launched a new playtest packet, and today we are going to go through this playtest packet, look at what's coming for the future of D&D.
Now, this playtest packet specifically looks at character origins, character backgrounds. It also looks at things like feats and a few rules glossaries such as conditions and other such rules.
But before we get into this discussion, we just wanted to let you know that our Kickstarter, Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim, is currently live, and we are adding so much more onto this project. So if you're enjoying 5th edition and you want a whole slew of new content, including a new class, the Apothecary, and new subclasses for every base class in 5th edition, check that out by following the links in the description below.
We're also going to be introducing new spells, new tool feats, and a whole bunch of other character options, as well as a deeper look at the lore of the world of Drakkenheim. So if you've been following along with our live stream, you can jump into what's going on in the whole world and start designing your own campaigns in our setting.
We're going to be having a really cool playtest process as well for all of the backers of our project that's going to be starting this fall too. So far, we've had every assurance that what is coming in the future for our favorite role-playing game is going to be backwards compatible with all existing content. But of course, if we do have to do any adjustments to our own creations in the future in response to some less than smooth backwards compatibility, we're going to be on top of that as well.
So check the links below to jump in on the Kickstarter while it is still live. And now let's start talking about what has been revealed for D&D 1, which is coming out in 2024 and paves the way for the future of our favorite role-playing game. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So as we dive into this document, I just want to start off by saying that the specter of a potential new edition of D&D can raise a lot of powerful emotions in many people. And just a reminder to please keep our comment section friendly and constructive as we discuss these new changes, because this is a playtest, and none of these changes are final. They haven't made it into the game yet, and Wizards of the Coast is looking for our feedback. So as we dive into this document, as we discuss these playtests going forward, be friendly, be constructive. It's okay to say what you like and what you don't like. We certainly are. But recognize that this is a development process that we, as fans of the game, have the opportunity to give our feedback about.
And I think that's the first thing that's really exciting about this document is that we are getting a look at early playtest material. This is still in development and it's not coming out until 2024. So the fact that they are showing this in bits and pieces to the audience and allowing that feedback is really exciting. It means that the entire D&D community is going to get a voice in what they like or don't like moving forward. And I think that that's awesome of Wizards of the Coast to incorporate that.
And so far we have seen a commitment to backwards compatibility and the evolution of the game. And I will say for my part, this document looks like a lot of common house rules that many people have been suggesting for a long time. It really looks like a lot of listening to the community already, a lot of collecting information based on how people are actually playing the game, and implementing a set of very gradual changes. So I'm personally quite optimistic. I think that it is most accurate to say that this is going to look like a 5.5 than a true new edition, which there's not going to be any big mechanical overhauls so far based on this. Future Monty, if I'm wrong, I'm really sorry.
One thing I will say is, while we talk about the backwards compatibility, this document was also paired with a great trailer that they showed that had several people in the industry talking about the new edition or the new advancements that we're making. And they really sounded like they like the foundation of 5th edition. They don't want to take away from it. They want to just improve upon it, which I think is a really smart way to go. I know that there's lots of people out there who like prior editions more. I, for one, think 5th edition has been the easiest to grasp for myself as a DM and for new players jumping into the game. And so I give it a lot of credit for those reasons. I've had to finagle and learn my way around a few odds and ends, but I actually feel like this document is dealing with some of those odds and ends. It's making some things a little more confusing, but it's making most things less confusing.
And ultimately, that is my overreaction to this, is that this looks like a lot of tweaks and house rules that we've talked about on this channel over the years. So, hey, the D&D design team, if you're out there watching our videos and listening to us, cool, thanks. Ultimately, a lot of these ideas have been well in the community, so we really can't claim credit for anything.
No.
But I do like that element of it. That said, there's good, there's bad, and there's a couple things in here that I think are pretty ugly. So I hope that the things that are ugly don't survive playtesting. But let's get into it and actually take a look at what's in this document.
So the first section of this document is about determining your origin. It involves several options on D&D races, backgrounds, and feats, which is all part now of creating your character when you get started. The first step of creating a D&D character is determining your origins, and we've got a lot of small changes, but a lot of them, to character races. The first thing that jumped out to me is the removal of ability score increases from races. We've tacked those onto backgrounds now, and we're going to talk about whether that's great or not so great in a few minutes, but removing them from races kind of just opens up racial options a little bit more, which I think is great. Not having the argument anymore on ability score increases and just being able to be whatever origin you want and playing that in the class and background you choose, I think that's great.
Yeah, so what we're seeing now is that every character race is kind of a package of mostly biological traits, but there's still some cultural traits in here as well. So we're seeing some interesting changes of where elves are getting their spellcasting and where elven subraces come into play. Or we also see the introduction of now the Ardlings and as the opposite of the Tieflings, which I think is a very interesting flip around from the Tiefling Azamar switchover, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. We'll get into that. And now we also see that the default option for humans is what was previously the variant human. Overall, things look pretty similar to what they were in 5th edition. I think that you would very easily be able to update or convert a regular 5th edition character onto using these new rules, and it's pretty seamless that you could probably have two characters that were created, one in 5e and one using these, and at the table you probably wouldn't even notice the difference.
Now, I do hope that we don't abandon the other racial options that have been presented. I do think that the Ardling presents a great catch-all for those of us who enjoy anthropomorphic characters. We were getting all sorts of bird folk, owl folk, rabbit folk, frog folk, turtle folk, and now they kind of said, well, the Ardling can be animal-like and anthropomorphic. What I don't like there is that they also have kind of grabbed the celestial origins and jammed it on top of this.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish the Ardling was just like, do you want to be an anthropomorphic animal? You can, but I love the Azamar. And I hope we see it still.
It's interesting because with the Tiefling, they have now the Infernal, the Abyssal, and the different Tiefling origins representing the different planes. And in prior editions of D&D, there have been different types of Celestials, like Eladrin, Gardenals, and the more angelic Celestials. And I would have expected the Ardling to just be the Azamar, but having those three origins being the angelic origin, the Eladrin origin, and the Gardenal, and then the Gardenal could actually be the one that was the anthropomorphic Celestial. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Ardling gets a mixed response, and we'll see how it actually manifests in whatever is published in the future. But we'll see how that mixes around. I also do think that I would like to see more robust rules for playing a character with a mixed ancestry. And for this reason, I do sort of feel like we should move past some of the language and go with ancestry as the term that we're using in our character origin process. Not the least of which is that I think that you could then tell new players, don't forget your ABCs, ancestry, background, and class. And you'd have the ABCs of character creation. I think it's perfect. You can have that one for free, Watsy. ABC, character creation, ancestry, background, class. Perfect. As we move into backgrounds, we see how the character background option has become this very customizable package of attributes. And a part of me does really wonder if we should open up the scope a little bit, open up the hood of character ancestries, and allow players to mix and match and really build their own ancestry and have that freedom and those options. Like, I like how the character backgrounds present a bunch of, here's what an acolyte might look like, here's what a charlatan might look like, and we could do the same things with elves and dwarves and dragonborn, and then just give the players the option to build an a la carte origin for their character, and it would be super empowering for dungeon masters who want to homebrew their own unique people that inhabit their worlds and settings. It would give such a powerful template.
We do see in this document a little snippet that says maybe you're a mixed origin of orc and a drow, and I had a player at my table who played a child of an orc and a drow, and they used the orc stat block and not the drow, but they just described their character a certain way. But I think it would be really cool if you could grab and piece together, like they say your age is somewhere in between, but I think it would be cooler to grab and pick which pieces from which ancestry you want to use. I do think that that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would give us more of a toolkit, and then groups could decide how they want to use those tools and how to build the campaign worlds and the characters that speak to them and the way that they want to play D&D. I think that this conversation is definitely ever evolving, but for my part, I'm on the side of more tools, more customization, more options, more ways of giving mechanical support, because I do think that reflavoring can only take you so far.
Yeah.
And so players want more tools to customize their characters. You can never go wrong with giving more options, especially when it comes to character creation, in my opinion.
Now, speaking of options, moving on to backgrounds, I have 2 points that I want to make here that kind of contradict each other, but bear with me. So when we get into backgrounds, there's some really interesting things going on. First of all, we have now tacked on the ability score increases onto your background. Backgrounds are operating much the way that they were before, with giving you gear and different proficiencies and languages and all of that sort of stuff. But now we have those ability score increases, and we also gain a feat from our background choice. Now, I love the idea of using feats more. I think that's great. The ability score increase being tied to the background opens up more options for your origins and ancestries, but it kind of might be taking away from your ability to imagine you being a fighter who is also an acolyte, or a rogue who's a noble. And it might be stepping on the toes of that customization. Now, my contradictory point to that is that I actually like that the background section doesn't start by saying, here's a list of backgrounds. It starts by saying, here's how you customize your character background. Then afterwards it says, here are some example backgrounds that you can use. Because of the way that they've positioned that, you could grab the acolyte and say, I'm going to use the customize my background option, use all the features of acolyte, but switch the ability scores so that I can be an acolyte fighter. So I do think that we are also alleviating that problem.
Yeah.
But there might be an issue in basically saying, well, you can't play the fighter who's a charlatan because it doesn't match your ability scores. But I do think the customization option is presented. So yeah,
I think because it's so customizable, I think that that's a very small issue. Me personally, there was a very early playtest draft of D&D Next where there was an ability score increase granted by your class. And I'm pretty sure Pathfinder 2nd Edition does this, where you get an ability score increase from your class, from your background, and from your ancestry. I gotta say, that's really slick. I like that idea. What if when you said, okay, I'm going to play a fighter, so now you get to choose as a fighter, do you want a +2 bonus to your strength or constitution? Or as a wizard, you can choose a +2 bonus to your wisdom or intelligence. Or as a rogue, you could choose a +2 bonus to your charisma or your dexterity. And then you can get that other +1 from either your ancestry or your background, depending on how those things shake out. And that might be kind of an interesting way of just giving the mechanical stuff a little bit more weight to it, and especially if everything is presented with an option of one of two choices. So we could imagine the acolyte background is like, okay, do you want to choose either a +1 bonus to your wisdom or a +1 bonus to a physical ability score or another mental ability score? And that way at every turn you always have more than one choice, and choices are empowering. Players will want more choices.
And I do agree. The whole theme of where D&D is going seems to be customization. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of customization. People want to play what they want to play, and you should always be empowered to play the character you want to play. And I think that we're moving in that direction, but I do agree with you. Now, my only argument is you said constitution and strength for the fighter, and I would argue strength and dexterity for the fighter.
Okay, I'll concede on that one.
But I do think that that's a really powerful option of saying, like, you get a +2 bonus from your class, you get a +1 bonus from your ancestry, and you get a +1 bonus from your background. Based on what you're choosing, you get a couple options, but that really means by the time you pick all 3 of those options, you kind of get to put your +2 and +1 in the places you would want them to go anyway.
Yeah.
So you're kind of designing that anyway. If I'm a fighter who's a noble, well, I probably want a +1 in charisma from the noble background and a +2 in dexterity because I'm going to be an archer, and a +1 because I chose a human in anything else I want. So I think that you could really, really customize that, and I think that's a really smart way to go. Are we getting there? Yeah. Do I like where we're going, and do I think that the background customization is great? Yes. Do I think it could be better? Also yes.
Ultimately, I think the ability score increase thing is a very small footnote to this because I already blew the doors off it with the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, customizing your options there. So that's already been detached from Ancestry. So it's just a question of where do you put it in and making sure that the players ultimately have the ability to put it wherever they want to put it. I think the bigger change here is that you're getting a feat at first level, that everybody is getting a feat at first level.
I actually love this, and I love that feats are now being designed in a way that they are level specific. So we're going to have a bunch of level 1 feats that you get to pick through either your background, or if you're customizing your background, you get to choose which one it is. And I also like that if you're playing the human, you're going to get 2 feats. Now, at first, when I read that, I was like, oh, Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master at first level. But no, because the feats are going to be locked behind level restrictions, which I think is actually a good thing. Do I hope that I can get my Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master by 8th level? Yeah, I hope so. But I do like that it's basically saying, start off with a feat. Here's a bunch of feats to choose from. You're going to have to wait till level 4 to make your OP character. But that's good. That's good for the game.
I have to say that I think that the master feats probably should be a high-level feat. A low-level character should not yet be a Polearm Master. They have to gain more levels under their belt before they can take those mastery feats. And I wouldn't mind seeing the reintroduction of feat chains. It might be kind of cool if there was an intermediate feat that you had to take before. I would love to see feats that have prerequisites of other feats. That would be a cool thing. Again, we don't have to go all the way to the 4th edition, 3rd edition bonkersness of having trap option feats. I want to make sure that these feats are still tightly balanced. And right now, the feats that are here, there's definitely some winners and losers amongst them. Like Alert and Lucky are still looking really, really strong, whereas Crafter is like, what's going on here?
I want to talk specifically about Lucky for a second because 2 things occurred to me while I was reading it. First of all, you get more luck points as you level up, which is great. But rather than being able to add an additional D20 to something like disadvantage, all it does is grants you advantage. Now, at first I was like, okay, so they nerfed it a tiny bit. But then I realized that my rogue has lucky. And this is actually so good on a rogue because any time that I cannot get my sneak attack in, that's a perfect time now to use a luck point.
Yep. So that'll be interesting. We'll see if it makes it through to its final form. I would not get your heart set on these feats making it through to 2024 unscathed at this stage of the game.
Fair.
I could see the races and the backgrounds making it through as is. I think the feats are the most likely thing to change. The specific text of the feats in particular. The last part of this document, though, I think is the most interesting, and that is the rules glossary, because it is redefining and putting in very clear language a bunch of conditions. And I think that there's 3 big things that stuck out to me in this section. Are D20 tests alongside critical hits and critical misses, the separation of arcane, primal, and divine magic, and the changes to inspiration.
Within that, we have both some of the things that I think are amazing about what's happening here and some of the things that I am struggling with.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I have any issues because I will see what I like and I can homebrew the same way I always have at my table. We use our own house rules for crits as it is.
Yes.
So if we continue to use the same house rule we have always been using, it doesn't really make a difference at my table. But let's start by talking about the D20 test and critical successes and failures. First and foremost, I like the term D20 tests. I think that this is a great catch-all. Rather than getting the loaded text of attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws, D20 test simplifies that.
Yeah.
And through this document, there's a lot of simplification that I think actually makes it easier for newer players and DMs. Now, what I don't love is as we start using these D20 tests for critical successes and failures, mainly that a critical success or failure applies to any D20 test.
The change here is that now a natural 1 on a D20 test, so an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, is always a failure, and a natural 20 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw is always a success. Is always a success. This is a change because currently in 5th edition, only attack rolls automatically hit or automatically miss on a 20 or a 1 respectively. So this is new for saving throws because it's possible in 5th edition to have it, if you, for example, have no ability score bonus and have to make a DC 22 saving throw, you can roll a 20 and still fail. Or on the flip side, if you have a plus 10 bonus to your saving throws and have to make a DC 10 saving throw, you can't fail. Vice versa, also for ability checks, which means skill checks and tool proficiency checks.
Now, this isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, I would say, for experienced dungeon masters. It does add some balance to the game. And, something like my rogue being able to actually fail a stealth check, because right now the lowest they can roll is 23, is a reasonable thing to put in the game. At the same time, I designed my rogue to get nothing lower than a 23 in stealth, and I would like to imagine that I'm a very good professional at being stealthy. So accidents do happen, so I think rolling a 1 and having that affect it, maybe that's cool. Back when I was just getting started with D&D as a DM, I wasn't aware that you couldn't crit, succeed, or fail a skill check, and I remember a time that my rogue player said, I want to try to run up this wall. It was a flat wall, it was like 40 feet high, and I was like, all right, give me an athletics or acrobatics check, and they rolled a 20, and they were like, oh, I do it, and I was like, oh, I guess you do it somehow. I don't understand how, but you did it. Which, as a new DM, now the book is telling you that that's what's going to happen at the table. And this is where it gets confusing, is an experienced DM knows when to say no to a player. A new DM might not. So when the player says, can I jump over this 60-foot gap? And the DM goes, yeah, sure, give me a roll. And they roll a 20. And you are there now locked in by the rules to say, okay, yeah, I guess you jumped the 60-foot gap. Good job. I don't know how that was possible.
And this is the challenge, because it's okay for attack rolls to have that natural 1, natural 20, auto succeed, auto fail. I actually think it's also okay for saving throws to have that too. Because generally speaking, the conditions for success and failure on saving throws and attack rolls are pretty binary. But when it comes to ability checks, there's a wide range of adjudication that a dungeon master needs to be able to have, because ability checks are basically used for everything else. And oftentimes the player is the one who prompts the ability check by saying that they want to take a prescribed action. And yes, it is pragmatic advice to say that if there's no chance for success, or it's a situation where success would be automatic, you as a dungeon master shouldn't call for a roll. That's great advice, and an experienced dungeon master knows that. Unfortunately, there's still situations where we can get into trouble having ability checks automatically succeed on a natural 20. And there's a few examples of this. The first thing, most basically, is that I as a dungeon master do not have my players' abilities memorized, And I don't necessarily know, when I'm setting the DC for a task, everything that the player characters are going to bring to the table. It might be that I'm imagining a task has a DC 30 difficulty, but then all of a sudden Bardic Inspiration gets layered on. Guidance gets layered on. Someone grants somebody expertise. Someone is using enhance ability. And now all of a sudden that DC 30 check that I thought, oh yeah, my characters are 5th level, so they have like, what, a +8 bonus max? It's now all of a sudden a lot more possible than it used to be. And so if I am just in the moment thinking, oh, this is impossible, it doesn't matter if they roll, but they can certainly try. I think the second thing as well is that it's not always evident to the player that what they're attempting to do is impossible. This is particularly true when the player is the one saying, I want to attempt this. And finally, it also means that oftentimes a player, especially new players to the game, there's this weird expectation that a natural 20 on an ability check doesn't mean that I automatically succeed. It's that the outcome that I, as the player, wanted to happen is going to be the outcome that occurs. So when I make my persuasion check to convince the king to give up their kingdom, my expectation that when my DM is going to let me roll, I roll a 20, now the king is going to give me their kingdom. When on the Dungeon Master's perspective, the choice was your successful persuasion check is going to let the king think this is a joke and laugh you off rather than just execute you on the spot. So there's a lot of challenges here. We could have natural 20s be successes on ability checks, as long as the rules are going to give Dungeon Masters the support they need to make sure that impossible and unlikely scenarios can be properly adjudicated.
With all of that in mind, we haven't seen the whole Dungeon Master's Guide yet.
Yeah.
Maybe they are going to improve the way that skill challenges happen at the table and give more concrete rule sets for how to adjudicate that sort of thing. In that case, great, we're doing the work. But as it stands right now, the natural 1s and natural 20s on ability checks is something that is a little concerning to me, and I want to see what it looks like in playtesting.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the final thing that I also think is a weird one is when you have a thing that different group members could attempt. It's really odd that a character who isn't proficient in a skill, especially a knowledge skill, can now roll that d20 and all of a sudden get that information. And so I do think that the rules maybe need to just say, you need to be proficient in a skill to attempt these types of actions. So as long as we have those kind of safety nets there, it'll be fine. And as long as we can help Dungeon Masters learn to interpret the results of the dice and know when to call for a die roll and not, then it would be okay to leave this in there. But if that doesn't get put in, it's going to create weird situations at the table.
Now, we could talk about that all day, but I think there's another part of critical hits that I want to address, and that is that critical hits no longer apply to spell attacks, and critical hits only allow you to roll one extra die of the weapon die.
Yeah.
So if you are a rogue who crits with your sneak attack, you get to roll an additional d8, not your extra d8 plus your 66. And I actually think that I don't love that in this. And it's interesting because I've definitely heard people online be like, you let rogues do how much damage when they crit with a sneak attack? But guess what? The rogue player who crits with their sneak attack feels so cool at the table, and it's never derailed my game. The paladin who crits with their 5th level smite has never derailed my game. Yes, they one-shot my boss, but so have so many characters before them that I just don't care. And nothing makes me happier than seeing my players rejoice at the roll of a 20. And I feel like adding an additional 1d6 or 1d8 to my critical hit is not nearly as exciting as rolling a handful of dice. Not only that, but I have a cleric at my table right now who crit on a guiding bolt against a prominent villain and was gleeful at my table at the critical damage that they did with a guiding bolt. I don't want to take that away from them.
I think this one is probably the biggest miss, more so than the ability scores auto-succeeding on a 20. And it's compounded by the fact that now only player characters can crit. monsters and NPCs can't score crits either, which I think is fun too. It creates drama. So I think let's roll back this change, Wizards of the Coast. Let's get the crits bigger numbers on critical hits are more fun. Let's balance monster hit points around the idea of big crits. Let's balance abilities like sneak attack and paladin smite and spell damage around the idea that they're gonna get big critical damage. That's fun. So instead of taking that away, let's pad the hit points on the monsters or whatever we need to do to make the balance happen somewhere else, because I just think it's fun for players to crit like this.
And this whole game is about having fun, and there's nothing more fun than rolling a bunch of dice, and that's what a critical hit to me has always been.
Yeah, it needs to feel weighty, it needs to feel significant. Just make the crits double damage, whatever it is, and it's easy math, just times to it, and let's sort the balance out from that assumption rather than trying to dial things back a little bit. The final interesting thing that I love is the codification of the sources of magic back into arcane, divine, and primal. It's a subtle world-building thing, but I like saying that, yes, this is arcane magic, this is divine magic, this is primal magic. It creates the space as well for the idea of maybe a psionic power source, which was really cool, and it's just fun for world building.
I also think that when you jumped in brand new at 5th edition and weren't privy to the previous editions, there was nothing in 5th edition that told me where druids or rangers got their magic. It was a little convoluted on whether they were divine or arcane spellcasters.
Yeah.
Being able to just say they're primal spellcasters and there's a third type of magic is actually really beautiful, and I think that that is very important for people who are playing druids and rangers to know that their magic is different than divine and different than arcane.
Yeah.
We could even in future books add in new sources like psionic magic or occult magic
or eldritch magic. Yeah.
Make those their own types of magic, and I think having different magical origins really speaks to the way you can picture these characters rather than just lumping it into two categories.
Yeah.
So I really do like that. I also like that we got these spell lists. We still don't quite know how they're going to work.
I think the idea is that there's going to be a universal arcane, primal, and divine spell list, and then classes are still going to have their own unique spell lists.
I think that's cool.
That's fine by me. It's great to have like a catch-all and then have the class-based specialization. All the usual suspects were still here. It's just interesting having those more generic lists out there because it does do some interesting things for homebrewing. It allows monsters to easily reference a larger list of spells. I think it's going to be useful overall.
As we move on to our last point, this actually goes back to rolling a natural 20 on the die, but one little inclusion in this document that I think is really great, and I want to see this applied to more areas of 5th edition, is what they've done with inspiration. Now, before I talk about the specifics, I want to say that my issue with several little pieces of 5th edition, this includes tools, and this includes several other things, the list goes on, but 5th edition did this thing where it introduces an idea, a concept, and then doesn't really give you guidelines to use it mechanically at the table. It gives you implications, and you can use it. I like the idea. We've been awarding inspiration on my table for just at the end of the game. Everybody's like, who was the coolest player tonight? Oh, it was this person. They had this awesome move. And I go, inspiration, and it's great. But then everybody forgets to use their inspiration, and everybody at my table has one inspiration that they never use. So I like the idea of giving things a mechanical focus, an implementation that tells a dungeon master, here's how to use this at the table. And now it's something that I can remember. The simple thing that they've done here is said, when you roll a natural 20, you get an inspiration point. If you haven't used that inspiration point by the time you take a long rest, it's gone. So simple, but I think I could implement that right away to my table, and it would make so much sense for how to use inspiration.
Yeah, the only thing that I think is a bit of a loss there is it was interesting having inspiration tied to role-playing, and now it's tied to luck. And so it is a bit of a change there. I think you can still give inspiration out for role playing, but ultimately, I think that the thing about putting the natural 20 inspiration thing is that it's going to remind everybody that inspiration is a thing that exists. Yeah. So maybe DMs will hand it out more often for role playing as well.
Because you always forget, and that's why you've never awarded me an inspiration point, right?
Pretty much.
Good. So we could talk about every detail of this for hours, but this has been a pretty good overview of our thoughts on this. Any final thoughts?
I'm optimistic. I want to give some loud feedback about certain things that need to be very carefully considered, but I think that this does show very clearly an incremental overall backwards compatible change. What's presented here, you could use this to replace the current rules in 5th edition and continue playing with the classes and other features as they are with no other changes, and it would all work.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that the things that I want to be vocal about, I am again grateful for Wizards of the Coast presenting this.
Yeah.
Years before it's going to be released and asking for feedback. It means that if all of us in the community don't like the whole D20 situation, we can be vocal about it, and Wizards of the Coast will probably listen if over 50% of the market is like, I don't love that, then they're probably going to change it. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I give a lot of credit to them for opening up playtesting this early, being open to feedback, and I just hope that that smooths this whole thing out so that by the time 2024 hits, what we end up with is something that the community helped with.
Yeah.
And made it just better, made it the best version of 5th edition D&D that we could ask for.
Do you think that the name 1D&D is going to stick?
I honestly hope not.
I think just like they were used to call 5th edition D&D Next, I think that this is going to, you know what? Let's just embrace it. Let's just call it 5.5. Like,
don't be afraid of 5.5.
Like it's going to, like, call a spade a spade. It's definitely an update of 5th edition. It's not a 6th edition in any, like, based on this.
Here is a thought. If they named it 5.5, I want to go back to actually a quote from the trailer that they did. They said, we're no longer feeling like we need to make a new edition of D&D. We feel like we can build on a foundation that we've created. Perhaps D&D 1 is the first of incremental additions to D&D 5th edition.
I just think that it's useful for the community to be able to very clearly refer to something. Like, no king rules forever. The editions are going to change. There's always going to be new editions of D&D because gaming evolves. The changes happen. The community's tastes move on. Every edition of Dungeons & Dragons is a reaction to the sins of the previous edition. 5th edition was a reaction to the sins of 4th edition. 4th edition was a reaction to the sins of 3.5. 3.5 was a reaction to 3rd edition. 3rd edition, it always is. This is just the way that the game works, and so we can love the evolution of it. The evolution of the game is part of the game.
I say that with this document, as a final note, I am hopeful and I am embracing this change. And I don't see a lot here that really bothers me. And the things that do bother me, the great thing about this game is that it's always open to interpretation. If they implement a rule that I don't think works at my table, I'm just not going to use it. And I'm going to use the rules that I've always used. And we still adapt things from previous editions into our game because we like them. And we're going to be able to continue to do that. So all that I'm seeing here really is a push forward for more customization, more options for people to play the characters they want to play, bring to life the stories that they want to tell, and have fun with their friends at the table playing this amazing game. So all in all, I'm pretty excited for what the future holds.
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking at every one of these playtest documents, talking them over, looking at what's changing, and really following how this evolves over time, and doing some playtesting of our own.
So if you're excited to hear more about our thoughts on D&D 1 as they release these packages, and also if you want to share your thoughts kindly on this playtest package, tell us all about it in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters, and we have an amazing patron Discord community where there's been lots of discussion about this already. So if you want to join us on Discord, join our community, help support the channel, check us out at Patreon in the links below.
And if you want to see us using a whole bunch of homebrew rules and other shenanigans, you can check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty of rules where we homebrew the rules of 5th edition and really make lots of changes. Check them out right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.